Welcome to Straight Talk for Entrepreneurs, where we reveal what it really takes to build a successful business. Whether you are starting with an idea or growing your business, this is the show for you. My guests and I will show you how to build a strong mindset, a powerful body, a profitable business. Hi, I'm Brandon C. White, and this is Build a Business Success Secrets. Hey, Jim, how are you?
Hello, Brandon. Very good. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Are you in San Francisco?
Well, actually, I'm in Tahoe.
Well, that's probably a better place.
It's a good place, I can tell you that.
How's the weather up there?
Well, it's stunning. We seem to be in the sweet spot of 75 degrees right now. So it's like a perfect temperature. Highs of about 85.
Pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining today.
Pleasure.
Real quick, we are recording, and I have no script. I don't know if one of the ladies I communicated with or my assistant communicated with told you, but I generally go with the flow. I know that sounds unstructured for a consulting person, but I do have an MBA, and I will tell you that it works. But if you just stay on afterwards, after we're done, I think you have about an hour. Is that right? Or how long do you have?
Yeah, I'm actually blocked, I think, for an hour and 25 now.
Okay. We'll see how long it goes, however long it goes. I do want to talk about your book, obviously, and wanted to make sure that you were okay that we talk. It looks like you and the two other authors sort of have sections. I want to talk about a few of the 9 strategies so that,
Sure.
we have something to talk about. Are you comfortable
Totally.
with talking about the other areas?
Totally. Anything. Yeah,
Okay,
we co-authored it, so.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. So we'll just get started. Hey, Jim, welcome to the show.
Brandon, thanks so much for having me.
And we were just talking before we jumped on here. It sounds like you're up in Tahoe enjoying some good weather and getting away from, I guess, San Francisco June gloom.
Well, we're avoiding the San Francisco June gloom and also the incredible heat wave that's hitting the Pacific Northwest. So it seems to be the perfect place to be right now.
Yeah, here in Half Moon Bay, we're lucky that we've had very cool days. I think on the other side of the hill, it's been in the 70s and 80s and maybe 90s, and here we're lucky if we get to 61. So
Wow.
it's a little carve out in the Bay Area. But I'm excited to talk to you today. You got this new book out, Beyond Great: 9 Strategies for Thriving in an Era of Social Tension, Economic Nationalism, and Technology Revolution. And you co-authored it with 2 other people. Is that right?
That's correct. Two other BCG senior partners who are longstanding friends of mine, Arindam Bhattacharya and Nikolaus.
Well, I appreciate you pronouncing that. And I did that on purpose because I was like, I cannot get their names wrong today.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I wanted to start off by asking you is one of the things that, at least in the, not necessarily, I think, well, maybe in the mature company world, but in smaller companies, I always encourage people to not let great get in the way of good and let good get out there. And now I read this book that basically says that great isn't even good enough. You're going to have to go beyond great. So what was the whole premise of you writing this book?
Well, Brandon, glad you went straight there. If you think back, let's say 20 years ago, and over the past few decades, there really has been a pretty standard playbook for companies, and the playbook was all predicated on a situation in the world that was relatively stable. And you could think of the playbook as focus on shareholders only. That was the raison d'etre for corporations, and build great products and try to leverage some form of economies of scale. And that was really the playbook. And then along came a set of disruptive forces. And look, there are many, but we boiled it down to these 3: social tension. And by the way, we've embedded climate change in that. We've embedded all the racial tension, all of the social inequality, all into that bundle. There's also economic nationalism. And so, I was based in China from 2000 to 2007. And at that time, globalization was universally viewed as a good thing. The more of it, the better. And now we live in a world where even the term globalist in many circles is viewed negatively. And then layering on top of that, we've got the technological revolution. And of course, that has been with us for decades. But as we've seen during the pandemic, it really has been pulled forward. Some are saying even by 5 to 10 years. So that old world in which the old playbook was developed has really been totally disrupted. And so we just thought that, given we're in a new era, what would be a new playbook for this new era? And that's why our opening chapter of the book says, great is no longer good enough.
Before we dive into a few of the strategies and unpack them, you work with big companies that are complicated and their image is vitally important to their future. And navigating today's world, I tend to listen to a lot of comedians. I listen to my wife and I, every night before we go to bed, because I think you need to go to bed in today's world with a little bit less weight and more levity, or whatever the lightness is the right word.
Yeah.
But even comics are navigating this crazy world where everybody's offended for whatever reason. I want to use the word entitlement, at least that's what it feels like. And companies have to navigate this space because they risk turning off a portion. And I guess my question to you is how do you see companies navigating that? And is it really the majority out there? I read this article the other day that from an academic that was talking about that it really only takes 3% or something very small of the population to make the noise and create change. And is that good for society, or is that good for companies? So how do you think companies navigate this in today's climate?
Yeah. So I said the old playbook has run its course, and in a nutshell, and I think this might be helpful in terms of answering this specific question. The new playbook at 60,000 feet, it starts by saying it's no longer just about the shareholder. Shareholders, of course, are still critically important, but it really is about embracing all stakeholders. So your customers, your employees, your suppliers, and of course, the impact on society and the planet more broadly. So if you as a business leader start with a mindset to positively impact society more broadly, then I think that's a good starting point for how to address that concern you raised. The second one is then to think about, it's actually not just great products, but think about from your customer's perspective, what are the outcomes they're looking for? What are the solutions they need? What are the experiences they want to have? And how do you make those as positive and affirming as possible? And then the third part is it's still important to be cost competitive, but it's not only that. You also want to build in the ability to be resilient. And we've certainly seen the importance of that during the pandemic. It's also about being agile. So part of it is, yes, there are going to be many shifts in the environment, but are you agile and able to adapt to those quickly? And so I think that what we're seeing is the new playbook actually goes some distance, I think, to addressing that issue about, different stakeholder groups, if you will, being offended at any point in time. If you at least start with a view that our goal is to try to address their concerns.
I have to ask this question. Do you think that the old playbook was fundamentally broken? Because why would companies decide? I mean, this is a real question. Of course, I understand why they would want to focus on shareholders, but shouldn't they have been focusing on customers all along anyway?
Well, Brian, it's fun. I'm in a book club with a few guys, and a few of them are ex-CEOs, and they give me a bit of a hard time, as if I'm saying something new. And by the way, they were good enough to read beyond great, and give me their feedback as good friends would. And they would say, of course, the best companies have been thinking about all stakeholders for a long time. But the reality is many companies unfortunately viewed viewed the other stakeholders, not the non-shareholder stakeholders, as a means to an end. And the end was to deliver, as much profitability and total shareholder return for the shareholders. I think the shift that's been happening over a few decades, but has also accelerated, is to elevate the relative importance of the other stakeholders. And I use this metaphor sometimes. I think, you might think as a CEO that you actually run something, but the reality is it's much more like you are in a multifaceted democracy. You've got customers who have a vote, you have employees who increasingly have a vote, you have government officials who have a vote, and of course you have shareholders who have a vote. So your job is really more to see if you can get as many votes from the constituency that you think is most important for you. That's kind of your job.
I want to ask this as I'm listening to you. Do you think this is really just rhetoric? And here's why. Because the system didn't change. Wall Street still wants quarterly results, right? CEOs are still incentivized by market cap and quote unquote growth at all costs. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm at the heart of it a capitalist. I'm just trying to understand if we don't change the actual, it's always about incentives. So while companies, all of us, are incentivized to say these things, the system itself has not fundamentally changed, because every quarter you jump on, whether you're a private or public company, you're still getting on a meeting with your board members and you're all have fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders, and you're all figuring out if you grow or not. And if you didn't grow, there's still this, well, what are we going to do to grow? Because having a company that doesn't grow really doesn't fit the model.
I think it's much more than just rhetoric. And I'll even take one very specific aspect of this. You talk about, even if you believe that it all comes back to shareholders. Well, the reality is shareholders today, many of them are actually putting significant weight on ESG scores. So your environmental, social, and governance score. And so if you think about companies need to access pools of capital, well, if increasingly you've got a set of filters applied by investors using ESG scores that determines whether or not they will invest in your company, what happens is the lower you perform against those ESG scores, the smaller the pool of capital you have access to, and therefore markets would dictate that the higher, therefore, is the cost of that capital. And so even if you were just motivated by returns to shareholders, you still would want to care about ESG. But I think it goes further than that. I think that actually the leaders, and certainly many of the leaders that we write about in Beyond Great, I think they're motivated not just by doing what's right for serving shareholders. I think there is an awakening that has happened. I think that leaders really are seeing we've got to be good to our customers. Look, employees, they are voting. And we've seen this, the huge, what is it? People are saying 40% of people in the workforce today are notionally quitting their jobs or thinking of quitting, and then looking at which companies are they going to join. And we know from our research that one of the number one factors that they look for is the purpose of the company. Is the company actually doing something that's good for society and the planet more broadly? So again, even if you were doing this purely from self-interest, you would want to be thinking about customers that are voting based on your social impact record, employees that are voting, suppliers choosing who they'll work with, and so on. But I want to make this point that I actually think that the best leaders are doing it not just for, getting improvements that they will benefit the shareholders. I think they're doing it because it is the right thing to do. And that's why our first strategy is do good, grow beyond. Do good, grow beyond. By doing good, you will actually attract more customers, employees, suppliers who will work with you, and you will thereby have opportunities to grow beyond other companies that don't.
That's why you're smarter than I am, because I think that's why I love talking to guys like you and women, because that is true. I didn't actually go that deep to think about it, but I think you're right. Why do you think that? What do you think happened that made us as a society really turn this corner? What was the pivotal moment or that made it happen, do you think?
Well, I think that, and it's been coming for quite a while. You know, these disruptive forces that we talk about. You know, social tension. So just the take that one. You know, the rising concern around inequality. That if you look back over the last take 20 years, globalization and automation, sorry, those have both been of massive benefits to shareholders. But of course, other stakeholders, and by the way, in many cases, customers as well. I mean, you think at all of the low cost products that people are able to access because they're manufactured in countries that have a lower labor cost. So customers have also benefited. But look at employees or citizens of different societies. You know, many of them have not benefited equally. And so I think what we're starting to see is that other voices, or if you say other stakeholders, they're starting to exercise their voice in a way that we didn't see before. Also, of course, we've seen the rising concern around climate change, which has become a huge factor in the equation. And then even during, let's say, the pandemic, people suddenly realized just how fragile supply chains are. And so where you might have said, yeah, of course, I'm all for globalization. Except when I can't get an N95 mask or I can't get my vaccine. Suddenly, then economic nationalism doesn't look so evil. So I think there have just been a number of factors in the environment that have contributed to this sea change from shareholders only to all stakeholders.
Do you think that there's a movement? I was listening to a podcast the other day, and one of the I forget who it was saying, they can't even go on and talk about the wealth that they've been able to accumulate, and they started from nothing. Do you think that there's a movement now that there's a limit to how much money people believe our capitalist system should allow people to make?
Well, I think we are seeing some pretty strong voices now around that theme. I mean, of course, progressive taxes have been with us for a long time, and I think the number is, the top 1%. No, I'll get it wrong. But anyway, the top 1% pay, the majority of taxes by some margin. And so obviously there's been progressive taxes for a long time, but we're seeing very strong voices that you got to go further, got to go further, got to go further. And now, of course, the latest plan, whether it happens or not, no one knows, but to actually dramatically increase capital gains tax in the US. So there's definitely very strong voices advocating for, taking more wealth from extremely wealthy people. But also there's just, I think there are concerns about the disproportionate returns that go to capital versus labor. And, obviously unions played a very strong role in the past, less so more recently, although that's not the case in Europe, where unions still have a very strong seat at the table in influencing decisions made by companies. So look, I think there is some sentiment around this. I think there's also sentiment against conspicuous consumption. And you see, and it sounds like you watch a number of podcasts, but even just a casual reader of the news would see celebrities that get in trouble for showing some of the conspicuous consumption that they have been used to bragging about for years. So I agree with you. There's somewhat of a backlash against that. And that's part of the social tension, I think, that is driving this change?
Yeah, I'm conflicted because I'm a capitalist at heart. I think you should make as much money as you can, and I don't think you should be penalized or looked down upon um, for doing that. And by the same token, I think we do. I always have this little spidey voice from my wife over here saying, "Hey, we need money for these social programs, and you don't want to go, like, I won't name a country, but when we travel and you go to another country and you see all these people
Yeah,
that are just homeless and really not supported,
yeah,
by the same token, there's this balance. And I think in companies, at least the United States, there's this pressure to say, are you making too much? And I find it, uh, I don't have the right answer, but I tend to my capitalist hat to say you're not making too much. I mean, that's the goal. That if we change that, we change capitalism. And I actually read there was a gentleman, I think from the Ford Foundation, who said we need to revamp capitalism. And I don't know that we should revamp capitalism, but I think your book, I want to read a quote because when I was reading it, this one really, I think, is for all CEOs, founders, leaders out there. And you said, to build an enduring business advantage, leaders of the 21st century enterprise must adapt by crafting a whole new growth strategy, rethinking their operations, and designing new organizational structures, which is really what you've summarized so far in talking about this. And you and your co-authors put together 9 fundamental things. Can we talk about 3 of your favorite, and then we will leave the other 6 to listeners to buy the book, which I encourage you to do because I think the game has changed. Um, I'm disappointed that I can't say just let good get out there, because now you got to be great and beyond great, which takes a lot of work.
yeah.
What would be one of your favorite of the 9?
Well, we let me just
Yeah,
lay out the structure of the
sure.
book for folks. So we have an introduction, which is great is no longer good enough. Then, if that's true, then and how do you actually then go beyond great? And so we structured the book around 3 parts. It's growing beyond, operating beyond, and organizing beyond. And then there's 3 strategies within each of those. So if I just take growing beyond, we do start with the strategy around do good, grow beyond. And so we've spent quite a bit of time on this discussion already, talking about needing to be purpose driven and thinking about all shareholders. But as a second strategy, there is one that we call stream it, don't ship it. And stream it, don't ship it was our way of saying that, the days of just providing a physical product are gone. Customers are really looking for solutions, experiences, outcomes. And so what we talk about is the need to be thinking about how do you deliver new solutions for customers, leveraging digital technologies. That's essentially what that is about. And also thinking about how do you personalize these offerings. And so to create a more intimate relationship and to be giving exactly the offering or the experience customers want for them as individuals. So you think about a company like Starbucks is a company that we talk about in the book as an exemplar of this idea of stream it, don't ship it. So of course they actually, and I love the company and I've followed them for years. And I love the book that Howard Schultz authored many years ago, Pour Your Heart Into It. And right from the genesis, Starbucks was an experience brand. You actually came into a Starbucks and had an experience. And so fast forward to a few years ago, they saw that the opportunity, but also the need to go beyond just the physical experience. So they went through a major process of how do we become the most personalized brand on the planet. That was the big, hairy, audacious goal. So what they've done is they've worked through a process of thinking about how do we take all the customer data that we have to create an integrated data platform? How do we leverage agile ways of working to be developing new value-added loyalty programs and personalized offers for customers, including, of course, the ability to pre-order your drink so that when you show up, it's waiting there for you and you just leave. All of that, and also even building in gamification. So if you have that extra latte, you benefit from that. They've created this incredibly personalized experience leveraging digital technologies. So that's one good example of a company that is embracing, stream it, don't ship it.
I think that's a great example of sometimes you hear people who say, well, I have a physical product, I can't do that. Well, that's not true. That it really isn't about the coffee. I mean, the
Right.
coffee is the end result, but it's really not about that coffee.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you can look across every industry. And that is, by the way, one of the biggest themes. After we had written the book, we did one of those computer simple algorithm. We generated a word cloud. And two of the words that stand out more than any other words in the entire book, digital and data. And those are massive themes in companies that are going beyond great. And it's obviously leveraging the power of digital and data together.
And I think that at all levels of business, every company out there now has the ability to do this. I mean, if you were just dumbing it down to saying we're going to do Facebook ads, you still are going to get a ton of data that you can measure and then use that data and then talk to that data, even in your messaging and in your marketing. Beyond the crazy customization, it's just even driving your messaging. I think anybody out there who's not doing that is crazy.
Yeah.
I did think about something that um, delivering, and I like what you said, because when I first started reading and it was deliver digitally, I was thinking, well, can you deliver your product digitally versus in person or physically? And I think some people can do that and some people can't. I still think there's value as we talk about a book. I think the Kindle version is interesting, but I think the hardcover is more interesting. Now that could make me old. Uh, could make me old, Jim. I'm open to
Yeah,
that, but I like taking notes there. So I
sure.
think there's a distinguishing piece there. What about on the operational side?
Yeah, yeah. So operating beyond is another, that's the middle. By the way, just one comment I would make. Noteworthy, I think, is we do dedicate 1/3 of the book to the topic of growth. And growth is the lifeblood of any company. And so that's why we put such an emphasis on those themes of growing beyond. But in terms of operating, just one of the themes there that is very powerful is what we call engineer an ecosystem. So in addition to conventional supply chains, where it's basically a bilateral relationship between a supplier and a company, what we're seeing is many companies are forming digital ecosystems as value-added networks to create and deliver solutions, outcomes, and experiences that customers are craving at an accelerated pace. And so let's just take one example here again. And by the way, the book, we were very deliberate about this. This is not a set of consultants sitting around dreaming up frameworks and concepts. What we did is we wanted to make this book all about real companies that are in the arena wrestling with how do you actually go beyond. So one of those companies is Volkswagen. So in a few years ago, they developed a strategy they called Together 2025. And what they put as the big, hairy, audacious goal was that they would shift from being just a manufacturing of cars to being a digital mobility company. And they call that We Connect. So what are the elements of that? It's also everything you think about the world of mobility. It's around security, advanced navigation, preventative service and maintenance, even the ability, of course, to control cars remotely as we move into to the new generation of electric automatic vehicles. So what they did is they said, okay, let's define what would that look like if we were the mobility platform for customers. And then what they said is, okay, what are all the capabilities we need to deliver that? And what they concluded is we could build all of those capabilities, but it would take us decades. So instead, what they did is they have assembled one of the most impressive ecosystems of partners. As of the writing of the book, 58 partners with 11 different countries and 6 different industries. So it's software capabilities, it's around digitizing the drivetrain, it's around the Internet of Things and cloud services, all coming together to enable them to deliver on that big, hairy, audacious goal of being the mobility company. So that to me is one of the themes we're seeing and how companies are shifting how they operate. It's no longer just bilateral relationships with suppliers, but it's this very powerful concept of ecosystems.
That got me to thinking, and I was reading about Volkswagen, and it sounds like they've put in a huge initiative, and they're going to, and you probably know more about this because you work with them. They're going to have to do that to keep up. And I'm a big VW guy, but I just bought a Tesla. And what I realize with Tesla, and I got to believe Elon Musk is doing this as a strategy, is he owns the entire ecosystem. He owns the solar, which I actually have solar and batteries so that I'm off the grid. I power my
Right.
car with the solar. And then I don't know if you caught this the other day, they filed for a copyright that Tesla would be, or trademark would cover effectively the modern gas station. And now he's going to own, well, he has some lounges in some of these places I've learned driving up Route 5 from LA. But when you think about it, Tesla will own the entire ecosystem, which you didn't touch on, but I'd like to hear your thought. That's a moat that almost no one will be able to touch. Now, Volkswagen is going to, and Ford and everybody else out there, if they want to compete and catch up, are going to have to create these ecosystems. So it may be a necessity for every single company out there, because once the leader, if you will, in a category gets a hold of that ecosystem in that sense, isn't it really hard to break into that?
Absolutely. And I love that you're still using the language of moats. But to take that metaphor, we've taken the moat around a relatively narrow castle, and now we've significantly expanded that. And charging stations are just the classic example of you having charging stations that creates a maybe not unassailable, but certainly a huge advantage. And then take that further into battery technology and your ability to have control over some of the incredible IP and the advances there, and really across multiple aspects of a vehicle. So yes, all of those things are critical elements of this idea of engineer an ecosystem, and that's exactly what he has done. And now, of course, the traditional automotive companies are running hard to catch up on.
Well,
By the way,
go ahead, Jim.
no, I'm just going to say the ecosystem is one of the 3 powerful concepts that we talk about, and I'll respect what you said about talk about one strategy.
Well, you can talk about as many as you want. I just didn't want you to give them all up for the reader. So however many you want, Jim, we can talk about all 9 today.
No, I think just one other one that I would just touch on quickly, and it ties back to something I was just saying about the importance of data and leveraging data. And so we have a strategy we call let the data run through it. And what the simple thing we use to build on the vehicle analogy here is that a lot of companies have thought about data as if it were exhaust, kind of emitted by their operations, and they would use it after the fact to measure and improve. But what we're seeing now is companies are completely flipping that, and it's really data is the fuel that not only predicts future performance or consumer behavior, but it's also really driving operations deeply. And so, we talk about, many different companies that are doing this. A lot of them, interestingly, are big industrial companies that you'd think of as very traditional companies. Companies like Siemens or Schneider Electric out of France, or John Deere. John Deere, interestingly enough, a company that you think about, wow, what a traditional company. Agriculture is one of the oldest of all human industries. Many people think of it also as being, a relatively simple business, but actually it's one of the most complex, because you think about all of the variables, the vagaries of weather and soil conditions, and all of the operational decisions that you have to make as a farmer, what to plant in what sequence and with which, fertilizers and so on. So anyway, back in 2012, under their then CIO, who is now John May, their CEO, they launched something they call My John Deere. And think of it this way: I like to say that they had the vision to become the Tesla of the farm equipment sector, because they basically said, we're going to flip from selling iron to information. And so what they've done is they have put in place this incredible data platform that allows them to take the very rich set of data. And by the way, they've augmented that by putting sensors, a huge number of sensors on all of their equipment, so they can get real-time information. So as you're literally driving that tractor through the field, it can be helping you think about and automatically adjust the amount of fertilizer, or other things you need to do to optimize the performance of the yield of that particular farm acre. And so they've completely flipped from being basically competing on low cost iron to competing on the power of information and solutions for their customers. And we're seeing this across just a huge number of industrial companies in the spirit of the Internet of Things. And just coming back to that one point I made, I think it's noteworthy that John May, who was their chief information or technology officer, is now their CEO. And we see that also, by the way, an example of Nike, where you've got John Donahoe, who is a career Silicon Valley tech CEO. He was on the board of Nike and is now the CEO, as Nike has been on their own journey to become a truly digital, data-powered company.
I was thinking I had read about John Deere and what they were doing, and actually bought the stock because I think that people thought or think that it's this old school company, but they are going to, on the industrial level or on the large farming level, going to dominate that industry from at least all accounts, that case studies that can be read. Another company on a lower level, to break it down and build on what you said, in the residential equipment, is Toro. And Toro is doing the exact same thing. Toro is going to automate mowing your lawn, no different than this little vacuum that we finally got. What is that thing that it went around all last night and vacuumed our place? It scans.
Oh yeah.
Oh God, name will come to me. But these companies are revolutionizing that. And I think people who are leading these companies have to think, how are they going to do this? And maybe you can help me. I'm trying to remember, there was a case study I thought I read on Walmart, and they may be one of the most advanced retailers in the sense that they're monitoring the weather, they're monitoring all this stuff, and it ties into their supply chain, and they're moving that in effectively real time, right?
Yeah, totally. No, this is it. And that's why I say the Beyond Great playbook, embedded deeply, is the power of digital and data. It's on us, but it's also the next frontier. So the third part of the book, which we haven't yet gotten to, is the idea of organizing beyond. I don't know, Brandon, if you want to go there or not.
I'd love to. I'm really grateful that you're sharing a few more of these. I always like to leave a few because I don't want listeners to get the whole thing and then have the cliff notes. So if you're listening, you definitely need to get the book, and thank Jim for sharing this. But share as many as you want in the organization and beyond. I know that you have some case studies on Microsoft, I think, in that section in the book.
Well, we do actually, and I could go there. There are three strategies in the Organizing Beyond chapter. One of them is get focused, fast, and flat. The next is thrive with talent. And then the third one is embrace always on transformation. And I got to say, each one of them, I think, has a lot of really interesting stories and very important messages for companies, because there's just absolutely no way that you're going to be able to go beyond great if you don't reimagine how you're thinking about how you organize, how you attract, inspire, and upskill talent, and also embracing this idea of always on transformation. But maybe I just go to that one for the moment because you put Microsoft in play. So the idea here, and by the way, a few years ago, I had the opportunity to give a TED Talk. And the TED Talk is called 5 Ways. Oh gosh, how could I forget that? 5 Ways to Lead in an Era of Constant Change. So there. And in that, what I talked about is how many companies thought about transformation as being a one-off event. Usually when they were facing some kind of a deterioration in performance, or maybe worse, a crisis, companies, leaderships would say, okay, we've got to do something a bit more dramatic. So they would set up a set of teams with some specific goals. They would drive hard for maybe 12 to 18 months, and then go back to this wonderful state of business as usual. Well, that world is gone. There is no more business as usual. We are in an era of constant change. And so into that environment, what I say is it's a little bit like the metaphor. If you think about the old way, the one-off way of being a sprint, the new way is more like a triathlon, and where you swim, and then no sooner finish the swim, and you got to jump on your bike, then you got to start running. And by the way, it doesn't even end there. But in an environment like that, if you think about that, that can be exhausting. Really? We have to constantly be transforming. Matter of fact, in the TED Talk, I say, when I mentioned that I came up with that idea of always on transformation, I mentioned it to my wife, and she said, that sounds exhausting. And that's exactly right. That's why it requires that you reimagine the approach that you take to transformation. And to be honest, Brandon, over the years, far too many companies have treated people as a means to an end, or worse, as collateral damage. And that's why transformation in most companies has a pretty bad rap. If you say, oh, our company's about to start a transformation, most people view that more negatively than positively. So then you think about, okay, so how do you reimagine that? And this is where the story of Microsoft is so powerful, which is that you go back to February 2014, Satya Nadella, the new CEO, exciting day, and there's an iconic picture. He's standing there with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. But interestingly enough, Bloomberg ran a piece around the same time titled "World's Worst Job." Well, how could the CEO of Microsoft be the world's worst job? Well, it was because of all the challenges that he was facing, not the least of which was the fact that out of nowhere, this little online bookseller, also based in Seattle, had risen up to become, at the time, the undisputed leader in cloud services with AWS. And so what's very interesting in the story is Microsoft had tried, but had missed out on mobile, had missed out on search, had missed out on social, and now they were really at risk of missing out on cloud. And so it was a must-win battle for them. Also, as if that wasn't bad enough, they also were facing what had become a very toxic culture. There's a famous meme of the top 6 technology company cultures from about 10 years ago. And the picture of Microsoft is everyone facing inward, shooting at each other with guns. And anyone working in Microsoft a decade ago would have said that's exactly our culture. So look, he was facing all those challenges. So he launched then a very holistic, but also human-centric transformation. And we've ended up coining a phrase around the way that they've taken the journey, and many other companies that we've worked with, and we call it the head, heart, and hands of transformation. So that the head, you think about that as the thinking part, which is to envision a digitally enabled, growth-oriented future, and then to focus the organization on that vision and to get alignment and communicate a compelling case for change. The hands is not just about executing, but it's how do you execute and innovate? Because in a world of constant change, you got to be constantly innovating. And so there we talk about the importance of leveraging agile ways of working while building the capabilities of your people. But what really distinguishes Microsoft is not just what they've done in the head and the hands, but the heart. And think of the heart like the physical, metaphor of the heart. On the one hand, it's the seat of emotions, as in pour your heart into it. But the heart is also an organ that pumps blood to the rest of the body. And if you're any kind of an athlete, you learn pretty quickly whether your heart is in good shape or not. And so at the heart, what we do is we talk about, and what Microsoft massively emphasized, first of all, was the importance of purpose. And so even though he was under a lot of pressure, he spent the time to articulate and activate a new purpose, to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And said everything we do, every product we build, every technology we incubate has to be driven by that sense of purpose. Also on the culture, as I said, that starting point of that inwardly focused, toxic, competitive culture, he put a huge effort to articulate, activate, and embed a new culture in the organization. And people that have been in Microsoft, whether as employees or partners or customers, talk about the dramatic change in the culture. Also caring for the well-being of employees whose lives are being disrupted, which of course has become incredibly important. And then the last thing I would just point to is the role of leaders. And Microsoft has taken to heart this idea of the head, heart, and hands of leadership, and have embedded a new leadership model that they call create clarity, the head, generate energy, the heart, deliver success, the hands. So you can see in how they've taken the journey, it truly is a holistic, human-centric approach to transformation. And the results, well, on the one hand, a market cap from 300 billion, and I hope you bought it, now 2 trillion. But as Satya would say, what he's even more proud about is what they've done for society more broadly, and how they really have embraced the idea of living out that purpose. And even things like, if we really believe to empower every person, then we have to make sure that even people that have different disabilities are able to fully leverage technology, or people that don't have access to the internet are able to get internet access through their Airband initiative, and so on and so forth. So to me, it's really the ultimate example, and we're so proud to include them as a beyond great exemplar.
I know we're running against the clock now, but could you just comment real quick on how Satya did this? Was this training with leaders? Was this a new handbook? I'm dumbing it down, but how could someone listening think about just generally making that happen?
Yeah. Brandon, honestly, and this is what I do for a living. I work at the intersection of our people and organization and transformation practices, and I come alongside companies that are going through some sort of large scale change. That's what I do day in, day out. And honestly, the best that I've been able to come up with as a way of articulating what you do is in this frame of the head, heart, and hands of transformation. To think about, you do need to get the vision right and to get the leadership aligned around it and focus on the priorities. You do need to think about executing and innovating, so the hands, and make sure that you're using the right ways of working, and in our case, we talk a lot about agile, but also upskilling and developing the capabilities of those hands. But right at the center is the heart, that bundle around purpose, culture, well-being, and the role played by leaders and how leaders lead. That to me is the closest that I could say to a formula for what leaders should do.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Jim. The book is Beyond Great: 9 Strategies for Thriving in an Era of Social Tension, Economic Nationalism, and Technology. I'm getting a tongue,
Technological.
technological revolution. Thank you, Jim. Where is the best place for listeners to buy your book?
Well, like it is for many things. I mean, click on Amazon or any of your online providers. Or of course, stores are now carrying it now that we're getting back into a physical world as well. But I think just go online and search, and there it is.
Well, perfect. We'll put everything in the show notes. Jim, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us and sharing a bunch of the 9 strategies. This is a great book. I recommend it to everybody. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Hugely appreciate this opportunity.